Every one of these stories begins with a manager's truly terrible idea. A new policy, a bizarre efficiency hack, or a team-building exercise from hell. Their dumb decisions create a ripple effect, leading to employee complaints so absurd they're legendary. Today, we're exposing the documented fallout from 55 acts of managerial genius. 1. In the ultimate act of paradoxical corporate wellness, a manager removed every single chair from the office, claiming it would promote a dynamic standing-based workflow and save money. The complaint was filed a week later. It wasn't just about the exhaustion of standing for 8 hours a day. It was about what the manager did with the money he saved by selling the chairs. He commissioned a life-sized solid marble statue of himself, pointing inspirationally toward the break room. The final sentence of the grievance simply read, "We are now forced to work on our feet all day, standing in the shadow of a monument to the man who took our chairs." 2. The anonymous idea jar was supposed to be a tool for innovation. But the manager introduced a toxic twist he called accountability brainstorming. Every Monday, he would read the anonymous suggestions aloud and then force the team to guess which cowardly genius had submitted it. The complaint described how the jar had transformed from a source of good ideas into a psychological trap, where people now submitted fake, terrible ideas just to throw the manager off the scent of their real valuable ones. 3. To save money on a professional photographer, a manager decided to create new headshots for the company website himself. His method? He found stock photos of models who bore a vague, passing resemblance to his employees. The complaint was filed by a mild-mannered woman in accounting named Brenda, whose new official corporate photo was a picture of a woman laughing maniacally while eating a salad. She argued that this new, unhinged persona was causing brand confusion among her long-term clients. Has your company ever used a hilariously bad photo of you? 4. This one is a classic case of how dare you enjoy your time off. An employee filed a complaint against their boss for being too happy in their vacation photos posted on social media. The complaint argued that seeing the manager sipping a margarita on a beach in Hawaii was demoralizing and an ostentatious display of relaxation. They actually suggested a new policy requiring managers to only post pictures of themselves looking slightly bored or stressed while on vacation. 5. An employee filed a formal grievance against their manager for being too stealthy. They claimed the boss moved with the silence of a corporate ninja, constantly materializing behind their chair and startling them mid-spreadsheet. The complaint stated that these jump scares were causing sudden spikes in adrenaline and were detrimental to their long-term cardiac health. But the best part was the solution. The employee demanded that the manager be required to wear a small bell, like a cat, to provide an audible warning of their approach. So instead of just, being more aware of their surroundings, this employee's solution was to outfit their boss like a house pet to avoid being spooked. 6. One employee went to HR to report that their boss was ignoring their psychic predictions about quarterly sales. The employee, a self-proclaimed clairvoyant, had a vision that a new marketing strategy would fail. When the boss proceeded anyway, the employee filed a grievance for willful disregard of supernatural counsel. Can you imagine the HR paperwork? Reason for grievance: management failed to consult the astral plane before finalizing the Q3 marketing budget. It's a bold strategy to try and get psychic insight, listed as a key performance indicator. 7. An open-door policy sounds great on paper. This manager, however, took it literally and had his office door physically removed from its hinges. He called it the ultimate commitment to transparency. The complaint was filed after his team was forced to overhear him scheduling a colonoscopy, loudly spelling out his insurance number, and then having a whispered, tearful phone call with his mother. The employee's grievance stated, "I now know more about my manager's intestinal health than I do about our Q4 sales targets." 8. This one sounds like it's from a movie. An office worker complained that their boss was improperly managing the office ghost. Apparently, a phantom named Clarence was known to rattle the coffee machine. The employee claimed the boss's skepticism was disrespectful to the resident spirit and was causing the ghost to act out. The employee essentially accused their boss of poor supernatural resource management. 9. The office got a new, high-tech coffee machine that could be operated via a smartphone app. The manager, a notorious micromanager, saw his opportunity. A complaint was filed because he had disabled the machine's manual buttons and was now the sole beverage administrator. Employees had to email him a formal request for a coffee, which he would then approve or deny before remotely activating the machine from his desk. The complaint stated that their caffeine access was now subject to a tyrannical and inefficient approval process. 10. A complaint was filed against a manager for breathing unfairly. The employee claimed the boss used a disproportionate amount of the office's premium air near the window, leaving only stale, recycled air for the rest of the team. They provided a hand-drawn diagram of the office's airflow dynamics to support their claim and suggested the company install a personal oxygen tank at their desk, for which the boss's department should pay. 11. An employee filed a grievance because their boss's dog was promoted above them. The manager, an animal lover, brought his golden retriever Max to the office every day. It started innocently, but then Max was given the official title of Vice President of Morale. The complaint listed how Max received a better office chair, was given premium organic treats expensed to the company, and was CC'd on important emails. The final straw? The employee was asked to brief Max on the quarterly projections. They were literally complaining about having to report to a canine. 12. A complaint was lodged against a manager because their lunch smelled too successful. The employee claimed that the daily aroma of the boss's grilled salmon and quinoa was a form of olfactory intimidation. It allegedly served as a constant, smug reminder of the manager's healthy lifestyle and superior salary, while the employees sat there with their lukewarm cup of noodles. The official request was for the manager to either eat more humble-smelling food or for the company to provide a scent neutralization bonus to the affected staff. 13. The company's latest synergy initiative was to rebrand all job titles to be more dynamic. The janitor became the Director of Environmental Hygiene, and the receptionist was now the Ambassador of First Impressions. It was annoying but harmless until clients got involved. The complaint came from a senior data analyst whose new title was Numerical Profit. He stated that he could no longer get on a sales call without clients either laughing or asking him for stock market predictions, and that the title was actively undermining his credibility as a man of science. 14. One manager insisted on taste testing the office coffee every morning to ensure its optimal flavor profile. But his method was the problem. He would walk around with a tiny silver spoon, dip it into every employee's mug, take a small sip, and declare, "Needs more sugar," or "A bit too bitter today, Karen." A complaint was filed citing health code violations and unauthorized beverage intrusion. The employee argued that their personal coffee mug was now a communal tasting vessel and demanded the boss get his own cup or, preferably, find a less invasive hobby. 15. In a bizarre attempt to foster a Zen work environment, a manager installed a large decorative hourglass on his desk. He announced that no meeting could last longer than one full turn of the sand. The problem? He became a slave to it. An employee filed a complaint stating the boss was now making critical, multi-million-dollar business decisions based on how many grains of sand were left. The complaint described a meeting where the boss cut off the CFO mid-sentence, shouting, "The sand is nigh, the sand is nigh. We'll go with option B." The employee claimed the company's entire Q3 strategy was now being dictated by the tyranny of gravity and silica, not by logic or data. 16. The office got a brand new massive sales gong to celebrate closing deals. The manager, however, decided the gong had a higher purpose. It was now the official, mandatory way to signal you were taking a break. Whether it was for lunch, a coffee run, or a quick trip to the bathroom, you had to walk to the center of the office and strike the gong of respite. The complaint was filed for the forced public spectacle of routine bodily functions, arguing that one's need for the restroom shouldn't require a ceremonial, thunderous announcement. 17. A complaint was filed against a manager for blatant favoritism toward their office plant. The employee alleged the boss spent more time nurturing a ficus tree named Frank than developing his actual team. He would whisper encouragement to Frank, give it premium bottled water, and praise its new leaves in front of everyone. The grievance cited several instances where the plant received more positive verbal feedback in a day than the employee had all quarter, demanding that equal motivational resources be allocated to both botanical and human assets. 18. A boss implemented a new office wellness policy, a mandatory 3 p.m. planking break. Every day, he would blow a whistle, and the entire team was expected to drop to the floor and hold a plank for 60 seconds. An employee filed a complaint, stating that this was not team building but a display of core strength dominance. They also claimed the office carpet was unhygienic and that the forced exercise was a humiliating and wholly unnecessary interruption to their workflow. 19. The manager became obsessed with the management fad of psychological safety. His interpretation, however, was that no employee should ever have to hear the word no. This created a nightmare of passive aggression. Instead of rejecting a bad idea, he would say, "That's a fascinating perspective. Let's put a pin in that and circle back." The complaint was filed by an employee who had spent 3 weeks working on a project that the manager had put a pin in, only to discover the project had been silently canceled weeks ago. The employee's grievance stated that the office was now a graveyard of pinned ideas, and that they would prefer a simple, honest no to being slowly ghosted by their own boss. 20. An IT worker complained that his manager, who was not tech-savvy, kept referring to the cloud as the sky computer. In a formal complaint, he argued that this whimsical and technically inaccurate term was undermining the credibility of the entire IT department. He claimed that when the boss told clients their data was being sent up to the sky computer, it made the company sound like a children's show. The request was for the boss to undergo mandatory IT terminology training. Has a boss's lack of knowledge ever created a truly embarrassing situation for you? 21. Have you ever had a boss who was a little too into their hobbies? This manager was an amateur beekeeper, and he decided his team needed to operate with the efficiency of a hive. He assigned everyone a colony role, drones, workers, and even a queen for the top performer. The real problem, and the basis of the complaint, was his new communication method. Instead of emails, he insisted on leaving blobs of honey on employees' desks, with different floral notes signifying different tasks. A lavender-infused honey meant an urgent request, while a clover honey was for a routine task. The complaint stated that not only was their desk now a sticky, ant-infested nightmare, but they were also being forced to become pollen sommeliers just to figure out what their boss wanted them to do. 22. Some managers try to motivate with bonuses. This one tried to do it with condiments. He was a hot sauce fanatic and decided to implement a sauce-based performance review system. Mild projects got a bottle of Tabasco, moderately successful ones got Sriracha, and only the top-tier work earned a bottle of ultra-rare ghost pepper-infused Satan's Tears. An employee filed a grievance claiming this system was gustatory discrimination and that they were being denied promotions because their palate wasn't adventurous enough to handle the high-performance hot sauce. 23. In an effort to promote radical honesty, a manager installed a venting box, a soundproof booth where employees could go to scream out their frustrations. It was a good idea in theory. The problem was the booth's location, right next to the manager's own office. A complaint was lodged stating the manager was using the booth as an informal performance review tool, later referencing things he'd overheard, with comments like, "Heard you were feeling stressed about the Peterson account. Let's talk about why you can't handle the pressure." 24. A manager's obsession with the mirroring technique to build rapport went dangerously off the rails. He became a perfect real-time reflection of whoever he spoke to. You'd cross your arms, he'd cross his instantly. The complaint was filed after an employee realized they could control him. During a serious performance review, they began subtly tapping a rhythm on the table. The boss, while maintaining intense eye contact, perfectly copied the motion. The employee argued it's impossible to respect a manager you can secretly turn into your own personal marionette. 25. In a misguided effort to cut costs, a manager replaced the professional office cleaning service with a single, battered Roomba that he brought from home. The complaint that followed was a work of art. It detailed the Roomba's reign of terror, describing how it would get stuck under desks for hours, suck up important documents, and aggressively bump into employees' ankles. The employee claimed the robot's random, chaotic movements were a perfect metaphor for the department's leadership and demanded the return of a human cleaner who at least knew not to declare war on a power strip. 26. The concept of intellectual property got a wild new interpretation from one boss. He was a health nut who made his own kombucha at home. After bringing a batch to the office to share, he declared that the unique microbial culture in the drink was now company property. He then issued a memo stating that any employee who consumed the kombucha was contractually forbidden from starting their own kombucha culture at home, as it would be a theft of proprietary bacteria. An employee complained, arguing they couldn't be sued for copyright infringement via digestion. 27. What's the weirdest thing a boss has ever made you do for a client? It probably doesn't top this. A manager, convinced that personal connection was everything, insisted his team learn and perform a personalized theme song for each major client before a pitch meeting. One employee finally snapped and filed a complaint after being forced to spend a weekend co-writing and choreographing a sea shanty for a shipping logistics company, complete with a jaunty accordion melody. The complaint cited mandatory musical servitude as the reason for their emotional distress. 28. The new manager was a former stage magician, and he couldn't leave his old job behind. Instead of just giving feedback, he would deliver performance reviews using card tricks. "Is this your missing sales report?" he'd ask, pulling it from behind an employee's ear. The final straw, according to a complaint, was when he tried to illustrate budget cuts by making a stack of financial documents disappear in a puff of smoke. The documents, which were the only copies, were genuinely incinerated. The complaint simply read, "He is a hazard to both morale and fire safety." 29. To promote transparency, a manager installed a giant whiteboard in the office and introduced a policy called radical candor. But his version meant that anyone could write anonymous, unfiltered critiques of their colleagues for everyone to see. The board quickly devolved from constructive feedback to petty insults. A complaint was filed after someone wrote, "Dave from accounting. Chews like a cement mixer with a mouthful of gravel." Dave, the one who filed the complaint, argued that the board wasn't fostering transparency. It was just a publicly funded burn book with zero accountability. 30. The company's new spirit animal. Team building initiative was already a cringeworthy disaster, but it didn't become a formal complaint until the performance reviews. A highly efficient accountant who had been assigned a sloth received a formal written warning from his manager. The reason? He had submitted his quarterly reports 3 days ahead of the deadline. The official reprimand stated he was failing to embody the core principles of his designated spirit animal and was disrupting team synergy by not embracing a more deliberate and methodical pace. He was literally being punished for being too good at his job. 31. The new office sound system wasn't for music. It was an immersive acoustic environment designed to boost productivity. But instead of gentle rainforest sounds, the manager chose a hyper-realistic African savanna audio loop. The complaint came from an employee who claimed the distant but crystal-clear sounds of a lion roaring were triggering their fight-or-flight response, and they could no longer make a cup of tea without instinctively checking for predators near the water cooler. 32. What's the most useless corporate gift you've ever received? It probably doesn't top this. After a record-breaking quarter, a manager rewarded his team not with bonuses, but with a certificate of digital land ownership, granting each employee a single 1x1 pixel plot on a random NFT website. The complaint was filed after an employee discovered their prime digital real estate was located in the middle of a blurry picture of a cat, and they argued that a voucher for a free sandwich would have had a higher and more tangible market value. 33. A manager, after reading a pop psychology book, became convinced that direct eye contact was a form of professional aggression. He implemented a new policy. During all one-on-one meetings, both he and the employee had to stare at a neutral third point in the room to foster a non-confrontational dialogue. The complaint was filed by an employee who had just endured a 30-minute performance review while both she and her boss stared intently at a potted fern in the corner of the office. She stated in her report that not only was it impossible to gauge his reaction, but she was now convinced the fern was being silently judged for its wilting leaves. 34. Imagine an office where every single item on every desk, monitors, staplers, coffee mugs, had to be perfectly aligned to face true north. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate from a manager obsessed with Feng Shui energy flow. He would conduct daily alignment audits with a compass, leaving passive-aggressive notes on anything a few degrees off. An employee finally complained after being written up because their computer mouse was pointing north-northwest, allegedly disrupting the office's chai and creating negative energy vortices that were affecting quarterly profits. 35. To save money on office supplies, a manager implemented a strict one post-it note per day policy for each employee. This wasn't just a guideline, it was a mandate. He would personally hand out a single, signed sticky note to every person each morning. The complaint was filed by an employee who described the growing black market that had emerged in the office. People were trading paper clips for extra post-its, tearing their single note into tiny, unusable slivers, and one person was even caught trying to erase a note with a pencil eraser. The complaint argued that the manager hadn't saved money. He'd just accidentally created a tiny, stationery-based prison economy. 36. The new manager was a recent business school graduate obsessed with metrics. He declared that all subjective feedback was to be eliminated in favor of hard data. His solution? The Smilometer, a tablet set up by the exit with a single question: how happy are you at work today? With a scale from 1 to 10. The complaint wasn't about the system itself. It was that he tied the office's coffee budget directly to the daily average score. If the score dropped below an 8.5, the coffee machine was locked the next day. The complaint described the tense, silent hostage situation that occurred every evening as the last person to leave had the entire office's caffeine supply for the next day resting on their shoulders. It had turned happiness into a quantifiable, high-stakes commodity with immediate consequences. Year 37. Imagine complaining because your boss showed up in your dream and gave you a bad performance review. Now, imagine the real complaint is that when you told your actual boss about it, they refused to formally apologize for what their dream version did. This actually happened. An employee felt their manager was fostering a hostile environment by not taking responsibility for their subconscious actions and demanded a formal review of the dream incident. This employee didn't just want a boss, they wanted a dream therapist who was also on the hook for their own brain's script writing. 38. A manager who had just discovered his family crest decided to incorporate it into his leadership style. The crest featured a badger, and its motto was, "Persistence conquers." He took this literally. Instead of accepting that a client had said no, he forced his team to badger them relentlessly with daily calls and emails. The complaint was filed after they not only lost the client permanently, but received a formal cease and desist letter from the client's legal team, which the boss then framed as proof of their unyielding persistence. 39. Has your boss ever tried to fix something that wasn't broken? To streamline communication, a manager banned the use of email for any internal message shorter than 50 words. For anything less, he insisted employees use the office's antique pneumatic tube system, which he had restored over the weekend. The complaint was filed after a simple request for a stapler got stuck halfway between accounting and sales, and IT had to be called to dismantle a wall to retrieve the message canister. 40. A manager developed a bizarre habit of only communicating through inspirational quotes he printed and cut out from posters. Instead of saying, "Great work on that report," he would silently place a picture of a soaring eagle on an employee's desk with the caption, "Success is a journey, not a destination." The complaint was filed when an employee was given their termination notice in the form of a picture of a sunset with the words, "Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end." They argued that getting fired via a Hallmark card was the ultimate form of corporate disrespect. 41. You always hear about mean bosses, but what about one who is too nice? An employee complained that their manager's constant use of positive affirmations like, "You're a rock star," was inauthentic and emotionally exhausting. The complaint stated that the relentless positivity was creating an atmosphere of toxic optimism that made it impossible to have a genuinely bad day without feeling guilty. They basically wanted their boss to be just a little bit more miserable for balance. 42. One employee went to HR to complain that their boss's beard was geometrically perfect and therefore deeply unsettling. It wasn't messy or unkempt, it was the opposite. The employee claimed its flawless symmetry and sharp lines were inhuman and created an unrealistic standard for facial hair in the workplace. They argued that the beard was so pristine it was distracting during meetings, and they actually suggested that the manager be required to muss it up a bit before important presentations to appear more approachable. 43. A complaint was filed against a manager because he hummed. Not loudly, not poorly, just a constant, low-volume, tuneless hum whenever he was concentrating. The employee's official grievance stated that the non-specific melodic presence was impossible to ignore and was drilling a hole in their sanity. They claimed it was worse than loud music because it was too quiet to complain about openly, but too persistent to ignore, and they officially requested that HR intervene and ask him to, please, for the love of God, think quieter. 44. After a company proudly announced a new wellness initiative that included free fruit and kale chips, they received an anonymous complaint. It accused management of nutritional tyranny and forcing a lifestyle of blandness on the staff. The note, written on a napkin, demanded the immediate return of donuts, claiming the lack of trans fats was creating a hostile work environment. You've heard of fighting for your right to party, but this employee was ready to start a revolution for their right to clog their arteries on company time. 45. One employee complained that their boss's laugh was at a frequency that made their teeth hurt. They claimed it wasn't the volume, but the specific high-pitched, canine-like tone of the laugh that was physically painful. The employee even included a link to a YouTube video of a similar sound frequency as evidence. They didn't want the boss to stop laughing entirely, but requested that he be sent to a vocal coach to develop a more ergonomically pleasant chuckle for the sake of office harmony. 46. In a misguided effort to promote work-life balance, a manager implemented a policy where every computer in the office would automatically lock for a full hour at 12:30 p.m. for a mandatory wellness break. There was no override. The complaint was filed by an employee who was in the middle of a live, time-sensitive video conference with a multi-million-dollar client in a different time zone. Right at the critical moment of negotiation, his screen went black and displayed a calming image of a waterfall with the text, "Time to find your center." He claimed the policy had turned his computer into a state-enforced relaxation warden that had just cost the company a massive contract. 47. In an attempt to be friendly, a manager ended an email request with a winking face emoji. The employee filed a formal complaint, interpreting the wink not as a casual sign-off, but as a vaguely threatening, coded message. They claimed the wink implied a secret, sinister meaning that they were expected to decipher, causing them immense psychological distress. They demanded a company-wide emoji and punctuation guide to prevent future pictographic hostilities. 48. A manager grew so attached to the large potted ficus in his office that he officially added it to the department's organizational chart under the name Oliver. This was strange, but the complaint came from the employee who, after a minor team restructuring, was demoted and now found himself listed on the chart as Oliver the ficus's direct report. He stated that not only was it humiliating, but the plant was a terrible manager that offered no clear feedback and seemed to passively-aggressively shed its leaves every time he asked for guidance. What's the most insulting thing a boss has ever made you do? 49. A graphic designer demanded a transfer, citing astrological incompatibility with their new manager. Apparently, the manager being a Virgo meant their micromanaging Earth energy was clashing with the employee's free-spirited Aquarius vibe. The formal complaint stated that the manager's star sign was fundamentally unaligned with the company's creative goals. HR had to gently explain that being a Virgo isn't a protected class and that they couldn't fire him for it. What's the most ridiculous excuse you've ever heard someone use to get out of working with a person? 50. The office thermostat war is legendary. This manager thought he had the ultimate solution. He placed the thermostat inside a clear, indestructible lockbox. The key was frozen inside a massive 20-pound block of ice in the break room freezer. His rule: if the entire office could collectively agree on a single, unified temperature, they could work together to melt the ice block to get the key. He called it a collaborative climate challenge. The complaint was filed 3 weeks later, stating that the ice was barely melted. Half the team had developed a cough, and the office was now divided into warring, shivering factions. 51. The problem was simple. Someone kept leaving dirty coffee mugs in the office sink. Instead of sending a memo, the manager launched a full-scale investigation he called Muggate. He confiscated every personal mug in the office, took a photo of each employee holding their mug like a police lineup, and created a wall of shame above the sink. The new rule: if a mug was found dirty, the owner's mug shot would be circled in red marker for the entire day. The complaint was filed by an employee who stated they now felt a deep sense of public humiliation and criminal anxiety every time they made a cup of tea. 52. To foster a culture of radical authenticity, a manager implemented mandatory Vulnerability Mondays. During these meetings, each team member was required to share a deep-seated personal fear or insecurity. The complaint wasn't just about the forced intimacy. It was filed after the manager began weaponizing their confessions. One employee admitted to a fear of public speaking, so the manager assigned him to lead the next all-hands meeting with the board, calling it a fear-facing growth opportunity. He had turned a team-building exercise into a source for psychological ammunition. 53. A manager, trying to cut costs, became obsessed with the office printer's analytics dashboard. He wasn't tracking pages, he was tracking font usage. He called a meeting, complete with charts, to announce that the department was spending 12% too much on premium pixels by using the Calibri font instead of the more economically slender Times New Roman. The formal complaint was filed after he implemented a font budget and began sending out weekly emails congratulating the most typographically frugal employees. 54. An employee went into their annual performance review expecting to discuss their projects and potential for a raise. Instead, the manager, who fancied himself a life coach, completely ignored their work. He spent the entire hour presenting a detailed, unsolicited PowerPoint presentation he had made titled Project U. It outlined the employee's personal failings, from their suboptimal haircut to their unambitious choice of lunch spots, and concluded with a 10-step plan for improving their dating life. The employee's complaint stated, "I didn't get a review. I got roasted by a man who thinks cargo shorts are business casual." 55. Imagine being an HR representative and seeing this complaint land on your desk. An employee claims their boss blinks too loudly, not too often, but with an aggressively audible clicking sound. The employee insisted it was a passive-aggressive tactic to disrupt their concentration and demanded the company invest in some kind of eyelid lubricant for the manager. They even suggested noise-canceling headphones, but for everyone else in the office to protect them from the sonic assault of the boss's eyelids. You can't make this stuff up. 55 dispatches from the front lines of corporate absurdity. But here's a thought that might be uncomfortable. We laugh at these managers, but every single one of them woke up, went to work, and believed they had a brilliant, game-changing idea. So the real question isn't which complaint was justified. It's this. What's the dumbest idea you've ever had that you were absolutely sure was a stroke of genius? Expose yourself in the comments. If witnessing this level of professional chaos brought you any joy, show it with a like. And subscribe for more proof that common sense is the least common thing in the workplace.